Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, August 4th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Pennsylvania and a Fox News poll that shows the Democratic candidates, Josh Shapiro, the candidate for governor, and John Fetterman, the candidate for senator, both leading their Republican opponents by double digits across this battleground state. Now, for context, in the 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden won the state of Pennsylvania by 1.2%. Donald Trump, however, defeated Hillary Clinton here in 2016 by 0.7%. Taking a look at past elections in 2012, Barack Obama defeated Mitt Romney by about 5 points, and the largest margin we had seen in Pennsylvania in decades showed that Barack Obama was able to defeat John McCain by about 10 points in 2008. In 2004, it went to Kerry by 3. In 2000, it went to Gore by 4. And yet, what we are seeing now is that a state that is so competitive, routinely a swing state, has had Democratic and Republican senators for decades on end together serving in Washington, D.C., is a state that looks like it is on track to elect a Democrat and a Democrat in both of their extremely important and closely contested open races by extreme margins, according to Fox News. Now, the reason why I take this poll and decide that it deserves its own video to be really discussed and talked about is because Fox News is a pollster and a group/organization that is highly regarded and highly respected by the Republican Party. This is the go-to news source for Republicans, and you would find that to be true in nearly every part of the nation. Now, one thing I like that Fox News does is join forces with Beacon Research, a Democratic pollster, and Shaw and Company Research, a Republican pollster. What they do is combine the methodologies and the political leanings of two very different groups and work together to put forth a poll that can be deemed reputable and nonpartisan. Based off of its rating, according to FiveThirtyEight, this individual group of pollsters with Fox News are rated with an A, calling 75% of the races they have predicted to be correct. I would like to think that that 75% number is one that we can at least somewhat trust. But looking at the numbers from the Fox News poll in 2020, I'm not exactly too upset by the numbers that I see today in terms of accuracy, because in 2020, they were off by just about less than 4 points. They said that Joe Biden would win, and granted, their poll was done a little bit later, or earlier than some of the other polls that were taken into full consideration. This one was done in the final 3 weeks of the campaign. The polls that were used to average out were done in the final week and days of the campaign season. But about 3 weeks away, or 2 weeks away, from the November election in 2020, they said Joe Biden would win by 5, as did many other pollsters at that time. But it became clear as the time went on and it got closer and closer that Donald Trump was narrowing up the race. And in the final stretch of the campaign, the average found that Joe Biden was winning by 1.2%, and guess what? He won by 1.2%. Fox News was off by about 4 points, but that's because they were gauging the race from weeks out. What will be super interesting is whether or not these numbers end up being true in November, which there is no guarantee that they are. But they are, I would say, a very good snapshot in time, because the average when the Fox News poll showed Joe Biden ahead by 5 was about 5 points. And as we saw with the actual average on Election Day, it seems as if the numbers here are very closely connected. Republicans did a last-minute effort in Pennsylvania in 2020, as they did in 2016, and nearly won the state. It was enough in 2016. Fox News was right for the time. And I think right now, they are also right for the time. Let's go ahead and look at some of the numbers that we see, what's the most important part, and what is actually driving the Pennsylvania numbers in favor of the Democratic Party, and how Republicans need to look at this and combat it, and also how Democrats can expand on where they are right now. So, the main questions we're going to be taking a look at, the support for candidates, and also the reason or backing behind these candidates altogether. These polls were taken on the 22nd through 26th of July, 2022. So at most a week, 2 weeks ago. They were done very recently and very much within the times of a post-Dobbs decision, and one that seems to be very positive for the Democratic Party. In question number 2 on this survey, they ask if your election for U.S. Senator was today, who would you vote for? Dr. Oz, the Republican, receives 36% of the vote. John Fetterman, on the other hand, receives 47%. This is a difference of 11 percentage points in a state with a Republican incumbent. 11% of voters here are undecided. And I don't doubt that the majority of these undecided voters will back Dr. Oz. But there is a reason why they aren't super willing to back him right now, and why this is becoming very difficult to see how this race ends up in favor of Dr. Oz by the end of November. Looking at the support driven for these candidates, why do you support Fetterman? Why do you support Oz? 68% of votes voting for Dr. John Fetterman support him enthusiastically. That's contrary to just 35% of those who support Dr. Oz. In terms of those who answered, I support them with some reservations. Just 18% of people say that when they're supporting John Fetterman. But 45%, nearly half of all Dr. Oz supporters, feel this way about supporting him. And looking at the last question here, I mostly dislike the other candidates. 13% of Fetterman supporters are supporting him because they don't like Dr. Oz. And 18% of those supporting Oz just don't like John Fetterman. But at the end of the day, there is a very clear lead for the Democratic candidate in this Senate election that actually matches the average that we see. Fox News has Fetterman ahead by 11, and all the other pollsters average out to, guess what? An 11-point lead. Heading down to the next question, they ask about the governor's election between Democrat Josh Shapiro. Right now, John Fetterman is the lieutenant governor, Josh Shapiro is the attorney general, and both of them are on top ticket races for Pennsylvania. Josh Shapiro leads 50-40 against state senator Doug Mastriano. Now, at first, you might be thinking a 10-point lead is worse than an 11-point lead, but they're still both pretty good. And I would say that Josh Shapiro actually I expect to do better than John Fetterman by November. My numbers don't exactly back that up, and I think that this is more of a gut feeling than what the numbers are telling us. But what I will say is just take a look at the averages and the overall amount of support by candidate when you put them against each other. This 10-point lead isn't exactly entirely on average. There's about an 8-point lead on average. But what we do find is that the overall percentage of vote share is higher for Shapiro than it is for Fetterman. Josh Shapiro averages about 50%, as we find in Fox News as well, versus John Fetterman, who averages about 49%, and according to Fox News, is at 47%. Meaning that technically speaking, John Fetterman can still lose if all remaining vote moves to Dr. Oz. But as of right now, in the governor's race, that simply isn't possible. You're starting to see the enthusiasm gap there again. 69% of Shapiro supporters support him enthusiastically. Just 49% of Mastriano supporters believe that same about their own candidate. And 39% of Mastriano supporters support him, but have some reservations. That's just 15% of Josh Shapiro supporters. And looking at the favorability ratings for Shapiro, 51-34, a difference of 17 points in terms of a positive approval rating of Josh Shapiro. John Fetterman, 49-34, a difference of 15 points across the state. Donald Trump, down 10. Joe Biden, down 15. Doug Mastriano, down 10. Dr. Oz, down 20. When you ask the question about Republicans and Biden, they are all in the negatives. But for the candidates that are actually on the ballot on the Democratic side, Shapiro and Fetterman, their approval ratings are through the roof, the likes of which many other contenders simply cannot enjoy. So what we find here is that this Fox News poll, a poll that has been done by two biased sources combining together to make a nonpartisan one, find that amongst one of the more conservative media outlets in the state of Pennsylvania, both these Democrats lead by very overwhelming amounts. Looking at the averages in the past, I've already shown you 2020, but let's say Pennsylvania is off. Let's say it's off by some of its worst margins that we've seen in the past couple of election cycles. But here's the problem with that. Even if we're off by the worst one that we have seen, and I will show you that in just a moment, you still don't find Dr. Oz or Doug Mastriano ahead in their respective races. The polls were right in 2020, but let's go back to 2018. While in this race between Lou Barletta and Bob Casey, Casey was expected to win by 14. He won by 13. That's off by about a point. Heading over to the governor's race that was on the same ballot, Tom Wolf was expected to win by 20 according to polls. He won by just 17. The difference here of about 3 points. Looking at the 2016 presidential election, this one is the one that we always cite as being egregiously wrong. Well, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump's difference here was actually only about 2.6%. 3 points rounding up. And in the Senate race, this exact seat with Senator Pat Toomey, the incumbent, might I add right now, who chose not to seek re-election, was supposed to lose by 2, and he won by 1.6. That margin there being the largest we have seen in terms of inaccuracies in a mainstream race in Pennsylvania that has been heavily polled and heavily watched. It was off by just under 4 points. You shift the state of Pennsylvania according to the Fox News poll or according to the averages that we have, and what a 4-point difference does is gives Josh Shapiro the governor's mansion by 4 points and John Fetterman that vote in the Senate by just 7 points. And I say just to really emphasize that it actually is a little bit more than that, because these are overwhelming results for candidates in races that are simply supposed to be unwinnable for Democrats in a year like 2022. Why is it that the governor election is somehow competitive? Looking at the averages, or the Senate election as well, Republicans should be dominating here. And yet the most reputable pollsters, including Fox News with an A rating, find that the results just simply aren't adding up for the GOP, and their chances at victory seem to be narrowing. There's this notion that as we get closer to November, Dr. Oz is going to start to do better, and I don't doubt that. But the notion that he's all of a sudden going to take the lead is going to take a lot more than just unifying the Republican vote. As we saw with Dr. Oz's numbers, he's at 36%. He has a lot more to unify than the Republican vote. And it is technically possible, because if you add the 2% from the other, 1% from wouldn't vote, and then the 11% from don't know, you could reasonably argue that Dr. Oz was going to win the Senate race. But that would be assuming a lot. Looking at a lot of the other numbers that we see, it's not just Fox News, but practically every single company that goes into this state and polls it, and they find that the difference here, the pushback against Oz, is due to his lack of favorability and inability to win over voters that Senator Pat Toomey, Sean Parnell would have been able to, many other candidates that could have won, such as Dave McCormick, was going to be able to win over, that he simply can't bring himself to win. The average here being 11 points is one of the more astounding parts of this all, because Pennsylvania is a state that seems to be heavily polled, and yet all of the results seem to be very, very consistent. And the expectation for the Pennsylvania Senate race doesn't get much better for the Republican Party. Looking at the chances at victory, let's see if we can even also find the governor's race here as well, because it is very, very interesting. Let's take a look if we can go ahead and just move forward and find it. What we find is that in the state of Pennsylvania, Democrats are overwhelmingly expected to win the race. At one point, Republicans were favored in the governor's race. At many points, Republicans were also favored in the Senate race. But more recently, that has turned into an overwhelmingly high chance for Senate Democrats, to a point where their chance in Pennsylvania, according to the betting markets, is higher than their chance in New Hampshire. Again, this is a state with a Republican incumbent. Point being, the Democrats are doing very well in Pennsylvania, and Republicans need to do a lot to combat it. What they need to do is appeal to these swing voters that are unwilling to back them. I personally think Doug Mastriano's race is a lost cause, and while the numbers may indicate that Fetterman is doing better than Shapiro, I don't necessarily buy that. I do buy the notion that Oz will narrow up the vote as we head to November, but I don't know if I believe that about Doug Mastriano. Obviously, some of these independents are going to move over to him, and a 10-point race in favor of the Democratic Party is very hard to see in a red wave, but it has been done in Pennsylvania in 2014. Democrats won there by 10 points, and I get it. It was against a governor with a low, double-digit approval rating, but at the end of the day, it was still a red wave, and that governor got a significantly higher portion of the vote than he did in terms of the net approval, or the overall approval. That could be true for Doug Mastriano, but I don't think Mastriano wins this race. I think it's possible that Dr. Oz turns this around, especially as more things become nationalized and if things get worse for Democrats on the national level. But the problem is they aren't getting worse at this point in time, and this Fox News poll only reiterates what we have seen from many, many pollsters thus far. The Democrats have really started to build very astounding leads in both of these races that should have been otherwise very easy pickups for the GOP. The Fox News poll is revealing that Republicans should be really focusing their efforts on Pennsylvania, putting more money into it, putting more volunteer efforts into it, putting more organizing into it. Democrats are obviously going to do the same. It's very difficult to see how Pennsylvania moves beyond this trajectory. At some point, it does become a doomed destination for the Republicans to lose some of these races. but Pennsylvania definitely can be turned around, and I 100% believe in that. But the question is, the Republican Party has failed to do so thus far. What's going to change over the next 100 days? And honestly speaking, I don't see much else happening for the GOP, but that doesn't mean it's entirely impossible. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.